Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's London Java community event with Mike. Let me introduce myself first of all. My name is Abby and I work with the LJC and a number of other communities, all of which are completely free for our members and run by RecWorks. RecWorks are a tech recruitment company with a massive difference. So obviously, as a company, we're always on the lookout for more clients, and some of our best clients have come from community members who recommended RecWorks to their internal talent team. So if you're hiring for a new team or you're working for a company that is, please do let us know. If you want to know more about what we can offer, just ping me a message on Slack or LinkedIn. My name is as you see it on the screen, and we really look forward to taking that conversation forward with you. So what's the difference, I hear you ask? Well, also, we really do believe that recruitment can be a force for good in the industry beyond just placing people in jobs. We have a particular focus on learning, mentoring, and personal development. If people want to learn and others want to share their knowledge, we are more than happy to connect you through our communities and events like the one today. We see this as giving back to those we've worked with in the past, but also paying it forward to those we hope to work with in the future. To date, we have run hundreds of different events for engineers, developers, students, graduates, CTOs. We have run conferences, lightning talks, hackathons, all sorts. Earlier this year, we made our 5,000th introduction through our Meet a Mentor community, and we're really excited about that and looking forward to what happens next in that space. As I've already said, we love to give opportunities for people to connect, and this event is part of that. If you'd like to know more about any of our other communities, again, please do get in touch with myself or Helen Lewis if you know her, and we can take it from there. The recording of today's session will be available for you on YouTube. I will put the link to the channel in the chat for you as we go through the event. And if you have any questions at all during the talk, please do put them in the chat. We're happy to have an interactive session today. So put your questions in the chat and then we can ask as we go along and see what Mike has to say. And with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Abby. So first of all, thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here and to be able to give this talk. I hope I'm going to give you a lot of insights how you can build better domain models and how to become a technical business partner instead of just being a programmer/developer. Okay, so without any further delay, let's share the screen. Okay. So is everything okay? Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so let's start with a question. Have you ever written a code without understanding why you are writing this? Feel free to write on chat or just answer or raise your hand. Yeah. Okay. Let's check the chat. Sorry, Abby, I can see the chat. Okay, wait a moment. Oh yeah, there is no one. Okay, so anyway, that happened multiple times to me and to a lot of other developers I've been working with. The reason is that, well, the main problem is that we actually have pretty good understanding what we are building, but we as developers don't know why we are building. Yes, what I am doing, why I am doing this, right? So another thing is, would you as developers like to have impact on business decisions instead of just being reactive in terms of implementing new things? Yeah. Again, that's something which is extremely important to me, actually, to have a real impact, a real business impact, understand why we are building this stuff, why we are iterating, why we are changing things. Yeah, that's extremely important to me. And I believe it should be very important to every professional software developer, not just to write code. Yeah, it's important to know why we are writing this code, yeah? Understand real business decisions and have impact on them. Okay, so during this presentation called Domain Experiments, I'm going to show you how you can build better domain models and become a technical business partner. Okay, so maybe let's start with some story, a story of some project It's actually based on my real experiences, but it's naturally anonymized. So imagine a great team of very experienced developers that were focused on code quality, good design, followed all clean architecture principles, test-driven development, domain-driven design. They had a very good understanding of distributed systems and fallacies of distributed systems. So we can say they were basically the masters of technology. But at the same time, they were not something I call technical business partners. They were not partners for the business in terms of technical implementation and technical details. They just wanted to have fun writing code, try new frameworks, and design maybe some architecture, infrastructure, but without really following the needs of the business. So basically, the architecture was not domain driven, as I like to call it. So the result basically was, well, as usual, it was a total failure. Yeah, the product was another toy stuff that couldn't really be deployed on production and wasn't even meeting all of the requirements of our customers. So why did this happen? So first of all, we don't know what we need upfront, we as developers, but we also as a business, right? And at the same time, building software is actually all about discovery and learning. And I don't mean only technical stuff, learning technical things like frameworks, architectures, technologies, but I mean learning and discovering the domain itself, the business itself, the whys, right? And this particular team failed because they were simply learning too slow. So what can we do about it? Yeah, the answer is obvious. We need to learn faster. But now, what's the best way to learn? Usually by practice, yeah. Personally, me as a developer, usually I learn the best when I try something, when I experiment with something, when I first fail and then improve to have a great success after many, many tries, right? And that's something that's quite common to many developers, in my opinion. Yeah. So after all practice engineering and science is based on experiments, right? But now the question is, how can we run these experiments in code directly? So you might say that prototypes are great stuff, right? You can try things, you can iterate, you can gather feedback, you can make new improvements. So in an ideal world, prototypes would be really great. But there is one problem with prototypes. They are not cheap, right? It's quite demanding to actually produce a fully working prototype just to verify whether we are on the right track. What I propose instead is to run experiments directly on the domain model, on the heart of the software itself. Okay, and during this presentation, I'm going to cover just greenfield experiments. There is also another way of experimenting in legacy projects, but that's something I'm not actually going to cover here in this presentation. It's quite similar, but there are some differences. We can have a chat after the presentation if you're interested about legacy experimentation. But let's imagine we want to run just greenfield experiments. And by experiment, I mean new model to check whether we are on the right track and if our model is able to express all of the real business requirements. So during greenfield experimentation, usually we follow this I might call it framework. Actually, it's my way of building new stuff according to true business requirements. So let's call it framework, but it might be an over exaggeration. So what we did first, we start with knowledge crunching, and you can use any way of knowledge crunching that's best known to you and your team. You can use event storming. You can use big picture event storming, for instance, to discover processes. You can have just chat. You can share some documents. What's important is to gather some very initial knowledge of your business, why you're doing this, what are the main processes, and so on. From my perspective, usually big picture event storming session works best for this. But what we do next when experimenting is we then try example mapping. I'm not sure if you ever tried example mapping, but the idea is extremely simple. What you do, you take processes, you take business processes found during the knowledge crunching session and try to split them into some examples. These examples don't need to be very specific yet. You will later make them more concrete when writing examples in code directly. But the idea is something like the case where user is locked, the case where user is unsuccessfully logged, the one where user is rejected, the one when payment is not enough to fundraise to start the fundraising. Yeah, so the cases, not with all the details. Yeah, okay. And afterwards, what works really great for me is to start something I call code storming. That's my own term, actually. But the idea is extremely simple. You take example and you write this example as a test. And when you start writing example as a test, what you actually need to do, you need to make it a bit more precise than the initial examples expressed on, for example, sticky notes, right? So what you do after having the initial example, you create the initial model. Yeah. After having some initial model to support just this one example, you try to verify and challenge the model. And you do all of this together with other developers working on the same project. Yeah. So you ask others to verify and challenge the model again together with you. And this is the case where actually mob programming works quite well. I'm not a huge fan of mob programming. Sometimes it's just wasting resources, and it doesn't support actually deep focus for some of the developers. But in this case, it works really well. I mean, you are trying new examples, writing initial code, then switching, just as you usually do when mob programming or pair programming sessions. What you do next, you again refine the model together, and you take another example as a test and create yet another model, the next iteration of the model. So as you can see, it's basically test-driven development applied, but directly to the domain model, right? So thanks to this loop here, you discover a lot and you gather a lot of questions for your domain experts. So after having some iterations with this model, you then try to ask ourselves, is your model actually acceptable, right? If your model is good enough, you create the ADR, Architecture Decision Record, which documents the context, the decision, and the consequences of creating this initial version of your model. What it gives you is that if there's any new developer joining your team, she can actually check the ADR to understand some decisions instead of trying to force their own, right? Or a bit more senior developers working on this project for some years might say, okay, yeah, we tried this model some time ago, but we decided we will go the other way because of, and then they can send the link to the ADR regarding this decision regarding the model. But even if model is not accepted, I mean, we haven't found something that actually supports all of the use cases within we should. You still learned a lot and you have a lot of great questions. So if model is not accepted, we are unsure what we have. We probably have a lot of findings and questions which we can share with our business experts. So what we do, we save all of these questions, all of our doubts, all of our examples which we are not sure about, and we go back to knowledge crunching, for example, on another day. And during the knowledge crunching, we work together with business experts, with domain experts, and everything repeats. So during the code storming session, usually there are just developers left, while in knowledge crunching session, there are both domain experts and developers. So as you can see, it's extremely important to have short feedback loops, right? Otherwise, we won't be able to learn about domain in good enough pace that will support our iterations. So yeah, as I said, feedback loops must be very short, especially during the greenfield experiments. When you're starting with something, you will have a massive amount of questions, right? So to be able to understand the domain, to be able to ask right questions, the feedback loop with your domain experts must be short. At the same time, if your team is unwilling to learn or your team is unwilling to challenge the previous decisions, domain experiments won't work, right? You shouldn't even try them. You need to have a supporting team to be able to actually iterate fast enough. So you need to be able to communicate with domain experts directly, and your team needs to be able to challenge the previous decisions. Basically, they need to care of what they are doing, right? So if you're not in such an environment, experiments usually will only waste your time because you will try to enforce something that's not supported at the organization level. It may also lead to a lot of frustrations. So previously I mentioned about the example mapping as a cornerstone of actually running domain experiments. And I said that's one of the best ways actually, right, to iterate and to run new experiments. And the reason is that for most of us, there is no better way actually to learn than by examples, right? Examples are concrete, so they help us to clarify the requirements. That's also how children usually learn, right? When you want to explain something complex, you are not actually explaining the theory behind it. You take an example that supports your supports your opinion or knowledge of any given topic, right? So you try to actually present good examples, bad examples, and say, yeah, you can go this way or this way, and this will happen or that will happen, right? This will succeed, this will fail, and it's much easier to generalize based on concrete examples than otherwise. So now when you combine the mentioned example mapping with test-driven development loops, as you saw on the diagram, you get something really, really awesome. It works like gold. And I'd like to show you how it might look in action. So I got a repository named domain experiments. You can clone it, it's public, but we will go starting with nothing, just very initial knowledge crunching results. And I'll show you how you can actually experiment and start building your software according to the concrete examples. So let's switch back to the definition of our business. Okay, so what we will be talking about, something I call the crowdsourcing. I've been working on some investment systems, also using them as a user. And this domain is based on some of my experiences. So basically, the idea is that the main value proposition of crowdsourcing is to allow investors to invest into any kind of assets. Then borrowers repay loans. So basically, crowdsourcery is a fundraising platform which allows investors to allocate their money passively, and that's important, passively, into groups of assets using automated strategies. Because you don't want to waste your time to invest manually into any opportunity. You want to say, okay, I'll just transfer, make some deposit, right? And say, okay, invest into this according to this strategy, this algorithm, and so on and so on, right? And when there is a new opportunity, the system will invest for you according to your automated strategies. So the very initial requirements you might have in some vision document or anything might be something like this. For the first one, any borrower can start the fundraising to finance their project. Yeah, that's quite ambiguous, but that's how it might look like at the beginning. That's usually how it would look like. Then investors can invest into assets. Yeah, that's again quite generic. The third requirement is that investors receive returns based on the asset they invested in. And the final one is that borrowers receive funds to finance the project based on some schedule. Okay, so this is some vision document. It's not enough to actually start the development, right? So let's switch back to Miro. Maybe you know Miro. That's one of the best whiteboard tools. I usually use my Miro to run event storming sessions. So I mentioned there needs to be some way of knowledge crunching, some technique of knowledge crunching. And let's start with one of the best ways of to crunch knowledge, which is the big picture event storming format. If you're not aware of event storming, just let me give you a very short introduction to the idea. So the idea is like this: you gather all the people that care, yeah, including business, including developers, including project managers, product owners, etc., etc. So you gather all of people that care. What you ask them now is to place some stickies on the wall which represents some important facts in your business. Usually these facts are, because these are facts, they are usually expressed in past tense. So it might look like this. Someone placed the project funded. Someone said, okay, investment is made. Someone said the project is defaulted. Funds received, deposit made, payment not received on time, schedule accepted, project repaid, interest paid, project canceled, investor registered, project started, borrower registered, and so on and so on. As you can see, there are multiple events, multiple facts happening here. Event is the same thing as a fact here. So there are multiple events expressing different concerns of your system, coming from different contexts. So in a real world, there would be way more stickies on the wall, but I wanted to make it manageable. So let's pretend that's all after running the big picture session here. Okay, so the next thing is what we need to do during the big picture session is to actually sort these events. So they say meaningful stories, meaningful processes, right? There are multiple ways how we can actually find these processes. One of my favorite methodologies is to use pivotal events and swim lanes, but that's not that's not in the scope of this presentation. So let's just imagine we used some tools to extract key processes in the system, and we have extracted two main processes. The first one is called fundraising, and the second one is investing, right? So the fundraising might look like this. That's from the perspective of a borrower. So borrower registered, then schedule is accepted. After that, project is started, and what can happen is that project can be canceled or funds can be received. And now when funds are received enough times, project is finally funded. On the other hand, there is the investing process. Investing is from the perspective of the investor, naturally. So investor registered, then deposit is made. After that, investment is made. So project is funded at some point, and then what can happen is that interest is paid, and if interest is paid enough times, then project is fully repaid. And what can happen afterwards? The investor can decide to withdraw the funds, so funds can be withdrawn, right? The other path is that payment is not received on time, so ultimately project is defaulted. Again, investor might withdraw some of the funds, but probably defaulting the project would lead to another process, which might be critical also for the performance of the system. But let's imagine we are having fundraising and investing and just that. Okay, so we are after the very initial knowledge crunching session, and what we can do now is to start the example mapping. And the example mapping takes some use case, takes some scenario extracted from these processes. For example, here we say that project can be started, so we can, okay, I'm having some problem here with my browser. Just wait a moment, I'll share the screen again in a moment.
If anybody has any questions, by the way, please do put them in the chat and I'll be able to relay them to Mike during the talk. I'm finding this fascinating. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, that would be nice. Sorry for technical issues, just a moment.
No, don't worry. Don't worry. It's always bound to happen, isn't it? We always get tech problems.
It should be fine in a moment.
Yeah, lovely. It is really great to see some names I know and some I don't at this event tonight. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. It's great to have you here. I hope you're finding it interesting so far. You've got a thumbs up from Andy. He's obviously finding it interesting. That's great.
Yeah, but I believe the screen should be working now.
Yeah, it is. It's back.
Awesome. Okay, so we ended up at taking a look just at starting a project use case from fundraising process. So we might say that, okay, so that's the first main use case here, starting a project. And the blue stickies here represent rules. If you know some rules beforehand, you can place them here. However, what I do, I usually start with the green ones, which are examples, cases, and then I try to extract the rules. But we might say that there are some initial ideas of some rules, like only verified borrowers are allowed to start a project, and project must be verified first before actually being able to start the fundraising. So let's take a look at the first rule here. Adult borrower starts a project. Okay, adult borrower starts a project. And as you can see, that's quite generic. I mean, generic that it doesn't say all the details, like given borrower that was born on some date and created an account and is a regular user and so on and so forth. So there are not a lot of details here. That's still the part you do together with your business experts. That's not something you do just as developers. You create these examples together with your business. But after business is gone, doing their stuff, what you should do, you should start iterating on these examples to refine them and understand them better, to create better models and find new questions for your business experts. So let's take a look just at this case, just at this example. Adult borrower starts a project. So instead of placing more stickies, what I propose to do is to go to the codes storming session, as I described it previously. So I'm going to guide you, starting from nothing, from a completely empty project without any code, how you can iterate on these examples and build your domain model according to true behaviors of your systems and find out some inconsistencies during this work. So we got nothing, just an empty project. Yeah, there is just this class Spring Boot application because I bootstrapped this Spring Boot project, but that's all. There's nothing except of that. So what we do next, we create something maybe like examples taken from mirror session. Okay, and okay, I've created a new class in test directory. So what I do now, I can give some display name. I'm using Jupyter here, which is JUnit version 5. Examples taken, examples maybe regarding starting a project taken from Miro session. We can even give a link here. So something like that. Okay, let's copy it, paste it here. So we have a reference here. And this is a generic description of this project. It would be also shown when running tests in your reporting tool. And afterwards, we need to have some concrete example. So to create this concrete example, let's take a look at this one. Adult borrower starts a project. Okay, and we can start just like that. Adult borrower starts a project, but we might also begin with something a bit more specific, like given adult borrower named George. When George wants to start fundraising of his project, then fundraising is started. As you can see, it's quite naive in terms that there are not any rules yet. It's just a very initial, very initial idea of what we want to have. So we want adult borrowers to be able to start a project. Yeah, we got nothing yet, so we need to start with something. Rules will emerge later. So since we want to have some adult borrower named George, let's make it. So let's create George. Yeah, we don't have a type named George. Yeah, this is the test-driven development loop applied to the domain, as I've shown it previously during the discussion of the diagram of domain experiments of the code storming session specifically. And what you do, you simply create it. Yeah, according to your test. Okay, so we got some borrower. Awesome. So this borrower is named George. So borrower named George, for example, right? So let's add. Awesome. Yeah, there is some rule, but that's another problem. Yeah. So we have George, and now George wants to start fundraising of his project. And now we don't know the right boundaries yet. We've just started, right? So we need to actually have some system which accepts the fundraising commands. We don't know what it is yet. We don't know whether it's a domain service aggregate, some microservice. It's not important for us at this stage. That's some system which accepts commands, and we don't even want to call it very nicely because we don't know yet. As Alberto Brandolini, the creator of event storming, says, you can use any words you want to, like some Bablosaur, for instance. It doesn't matter, right? So I will call this simply like this: some system accepting accepting start fundraising comments, right? It's very long. It will naturally change, but I don't know what it is yet. So let's name it like this, okay? Okay, so I don't want to create the local type. I want to create a class here. Okay, so there is some system also. Okay, and let's name it some system. Okay, some system. Awesome. Okay, so we got some system, and now the system needs to be able to accept the fundraising, right? So start fundraising by George, something like that. Okay, awesome. So let's add this method. There is no method start fundraising by it, so let's add it. And now the idea is that basically you need to express some effects of invoking this command, right? There are multiple ways you can do this naturally. You can expose some getters, you can expose some read models, you can have some other systems reacting to the events produced by this command and then making projections. So there are multiple ways how you can actually build this. And this is also some design decision regarding your domain model. So I might use any of these approaches, but I will start with something which is the most natural to me: returning domain events directly. Yeah, since we started with domain events, we started with event storming sessions. Events are central to our system, central to the understanding of our processes. So if domain events are so important, why not to represent them here directly and simply return them? Let system accept some command and return some events. Publishing is at the implication or infrastructure level. So input, output, yeah, just like that. It's quite similar to the functional programming and very close to the event sourcing, in fact. So we don't have domain events. So let's create it, right? Okay. And now let's change start fundraising by to return these domain events. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And now, since our system is just something that accepts commands and produces some events, we can say something like that, that events has occurred event of type. Okay, something like that, which returns Boolean. Fundraising started. Okay, so let's change has occurred of event of type, and now we need to say what type of event. Project fundraising started, something like that. Okay, so let's create it again. Okay, and add argument in has occurred event of type. Naturally, in next iterations, you would make it more generic. You will implement all the details here and so on and so forth, but it's not so important during this live session. So let's just focus on what's really important and say that it's true. And this way, we actually have a very first executable, not passing naturally as in test-driven development, but very first example expressed in your test with some very, very initial model. Yeah, this model is extremely naive. It would need to be changed multiple times, hundreds of times, before you reach something Eric Evans calls conceptual contours, which is the right spot, the right place for your domain model, the right fit for your domain model. But we started with nothing, yeah, and we created some foundations of our ubiquitous language, of the business expressed directly in code. Naturally, this test won't pass now, but I believe you can see how the flow looks like. So what I would do next, I'll simply sweep check out next steps, next commits in these iterations, so you can see how it evolves without wasting time or on producing this code during the live coding session. Okay, so let's start with resetting everything here. Okay, so reset, clean. Okay, and let's go to the first step, the first pre-committed step. Just a moment. Okay, check out the revision. So basically, the first step is very similar to what you've just seen, right? The difference is that this example passes. So again, we are having examples from Miro, and then I decided to have a nested class. So I have for each use case, I decided to have a nested class. So starting a project, and then we can say that given all the borrower and borrower to start the project, then project is started successfully. And as you can see, the idea is that since there are no rules yet at this stage, the implementation of start project command handler is extremely simple, and it always produces project started event, always, right? So currently after the first step, we have a very simple system that always allows to start the fundraising. But let's iterate to more examples. And now what we do, based on the adult borrower starter project, we need to produce a bit more specific example as a testing code. Yeah. So we had a successful case. Now we need to have a fail case, right? So something like that. That's our previous example. Given adult borrower, when borrower wants to start the project, then project is started successfully. Yeah. And so that's something we already discussed. But now there is another one. Given borrower who is 17 years old, when borrower wants to start a project, then project is not started, right? And now that's the moment when there is a first if in our command handler. Yeah. Now our command handler looks like this. If can accept the borrower, then start the fundraising of the project. Otherwise, do nothing. And in can accept, we simply check whether borrower is adult. Okay, so that's our next iteration. Then let's move to another step. Okay, and what we are doing now, we are refactoring the test to actually have some parameterized examples. Like instead of producing a test for each age, for any age, we simply produce one test with parameterized test with parameters, and that's just refactor on the test level. What you can see here is that when we are producing the borrower of given age, right here, then our implementation again is extremely naive. And what we have done, we simply passed some age to the borrower, but naturally that's something which is plain wrong, right? We wouldn't want to update age of any borrower every single tick of a time, right? It doesn't make simply sense. So that might be a very dumb iteration, but we are iterating, so we can do dumb things. Yeah. So In the next iteration, we changed it. So we are passing the local date as a birth date, right? And expressing the same examples just by changing the factories of test cases. Okay, so we are basically still talking about this one, idle borrower starts a project, and now we might have some insight, we as developers. Yeah, the next step is actually something I marked here as the first breakthrough, right? And the first breakthrough is about our insight regarding checking the age of the borrower in this system. Because let's stop for a moment and think. We are operating on money. Do we even want to have users in our system which are not adults? Well, probably doesn't make sense, right? So instead of checking during starting fundraising of a project if our borrower is adult, instead of checking it here, we introduced a new concept, and we as developer name it new borrower registers. And in these examples, we express that only adult borrowers can register their accounts, right? And then we express that given birth date and current date, then this borrower can register her account, right? It can be expressed directly on type here, but it can be also expressed as some rule in the registration systems, right? And here you can see that borrowers younger than 18 years old cannot register their accounts. So basically, we moved checking the age from fundraising system to the registration system, right? Because we don't even want to have such users in money in system which is all about money and investments, right? So that's our first insight, and we might be not sure if that's the best option. So what we do, we say, okay, so that's our insight. We want to move it from starting a project use case to new borrower registers use case, and add rules here. And this is something we should ask our domain experts again, right? So we might not be sure whether this is the right approach, but we have some great questions we should ask. And that's why I placed these findings again on the mirror, so it can be shared with our domain experts during the next knowledge crunching session, right? Okay, so after having the first breakthrough, that's something we should save as hotspot, save as some questions, ask our users, our domain experts, sorry about this. So maybe let's move a bit forward, a few comments forward again. Okay, just give it a moment. Okay. Okay, and let's take a look at some of new examples. Yeah, we have also not covered this example. Borrower without criminal record starts the project. Yeah, so again, it's expressed here in the starting the project use case, but based on the experiences we had with registration of the borrower, we might apply the same thinking process. Do we even want to have criminals in our system? Probably not, right? So let's move it from starting a project to registering a new borrower. Yeah, so again, we move it from here to new borrower register rule. Yeah, right? So that's how it's expressed here in our new example. Person with criminal record cannot register her account. And what I do here is I show that when I register someone based on some registration form in the borrower registry, there is an exception, borrower registry exception, right? When this user have a criminal record. So as you can see, we as a developers know that, okay, probably checking the criminal record is not just a flag in our system, right? It's not just a boolean. It's probably an entry to some other system, right? So here, what we do is that we actually create some criminal record aware registration, having this criminal record here, which basically is an interface, is a strategy that simply allows us to check whether a given person has some criminal record. And this would probably be a completely another system. This would be an entry to some other system, right? Okay, and again, that's our next iteration. Yeah, we added new role. We are checking against against the criminal record. We are adding more and more examples and gaining more and more insight about it. So let's move again forward. So as you can see, there's also a new concept that appeared in code. We are not sure if that's the right name. We might talk with our domain expert, but you've probably seen that there was something named borrower registry, right? So that's also some new definition coming directly from experimentation on code. Okay, so now by checking on more and more examples, we can see that basically we don't need to check any age or criminal record here, but the project still must be verified. So there are some examples like it's okay when less than $10,000. It's okay to start it immediately, or need to be verified manually when it's greater than $10,000 or equal to, right? So we again incorporate these examples into our tests. So what we do now, we check something we call project proposal. So again, a new definition. So there are two new examples in our starting a project use case. So given project proposal of 9,000 total value, when we want to start a project based on this proposal, then project is started successfully immediately, right? So this is the case where we say, okay, the project is started immediately because it's less than $10,000. As you can see, there is also a new term we introduced here in the code called project proposal. It's just our initial insight on the name. We should discuss this with domain experts. So we should also include this on Miro board. Now, there is also another case. Given a project proposal of $10,000 total value, when Bro wants to start a project based on this proposal, then project needs to be verified first. Yeah, and that's another case. So when project is not very cheap, we need to have some extra strategy, which tells us that, okay, based on this rule, what happens is that project request is accepted for verification, and we need to verify this project. Maybe manually, maybe using some automated strategies, maybe using some AI, but you get the point. You need to first verify this before accepting this. And this is actually the role of starting a fundraising system, right? Because it can be dynamic. Okay, so based on these examples, what we can see is that we actually can incorporate our findings that project must be verified when it's okay, when less than $10,000, then project can be started immediately, but the project proposal is accepted for verification when value of the fundraising goal is at least $10,000, right? And you can see we added these events here to discuss them with our domain experts. We also added the hotspot, the question, how verification works exactly, right? Because it's very important. There are also some new definitions like project proposal and project proposal supervisor. Project proposal supervisor is actually the thing that takes the project proposal and checks whether we allow someone to start the fundraising immediately, right? So as you can see, we produced some code, and all of this is coming just from the domain model, right? There is no any infrastructure, there is no notion of application layer, there is no notion of APIs, there is no Kafka, there is no RabbitMQ, there are no databases at all, right? What we've created, we've just been working on the domain model directly to find out the behaviors of the system and solve all of the inconsistencies and have meaningful questions for our business experts. So basically, this concludes the demo session. So if you enjoyed it, I would be very happy to stay in touch. You can mail me at Mike Wojtyna PL, or find me on LinkedIn under the name Michał Wojtyna. Yeah, that's Polish name eventually here in LinkedIn. So I leave it for a moment in case you would like to send me some message or discuss anything after the presentation. And if you enjoyed it, I invite you to join How to Be Pro, which is my mentorship program, in which I try to teach all of the important things of software development that are orthogonal to any technological issues. So basically everything related to becoming a technical business partner, related to architecture, related to designing best domain models supporting your business. So thank you very much. I believe we have some time for questions and answer sessions. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Fantastic, Mike. Thank you so much. We have had a couple of comments in the chat just to say thank you so much for your talk. It's been really interesting, but people needed to drop off slightly early. But they'll obviously come back and watch the rest of the recording, which is great. Does anybody have any questions that you'd like to ask while we have time? I'll just give it a few moments in case anybody's frantically typing away in the chat.
Yeah, you can just unmute and ask the questions directly. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I'm going to take that as a no. You must have covered everything exactly perfectly, Mike. Or people will think of questions later and get in touch, as you've said they can. So all that is left for me to say today is thank you so much, Mike, for being able to come and share with us some of what you know. It's been really interesting to hear from you. And thank you to everybody who's joined us today. And if you're watching online, I hope you really enjoyed the session as well. And like Mike says, if you have any questions, please do get in touch with him and he'll be able to hopefully answer them for you. You're getting a round of applause from Andy, so that's always good. Thank you so much, Andy. So yes, thank you everybody so much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you at our next LJC event. Take care.
Thank you very much. See
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.